Hey guys, welcome to Beyond the Tape podcast, a podcast that focuses on rad people doing amazing things within the mountain bike industry. This episode, we're chatting to someone a little bit different. He is the editor or tech editor for Cycling Tips, been a journalist for a very, very long time, ridden bikes for even longer, and man, he is obsessed with tools. If you check out Instagram, head over to Roman Stuff. Dave Rome, absolute legend of the sport, legend within journalism. And man, if you want to learn more about what tools to use and what makes a good tool, please go and follow him because he's done some really, really cool shit. Before we jump into the episode though, I want to thank a few sponsors and supporters of this podcast. First of all, this podcast is brought to you by Trek. And I can't remember if I mentioned this in the last episode or whether it's been released in between them. But man, their new Fuel EXE is rad. I've had that bike for about a month-ish now, and they're going to have to fly down here and pry that thing out of my cold, dead arms. The new TQ motor is dead silent, thanks to its unique kind of ring drive system. It offers 50 Newton meters of torque, and man, you barely even notice that you're riding the e-bike. There's no more zzz as you ride along. It's just tranquil, peaceful bliss when you're out in the wildlife, which is, a big part of being on a mountain bike. It's fully integrated, carbon, looks amazing, can barely tell it's an e-bike. Absolutely love it. It's so damn good. If you're not an e-bike or you're on your normal bike and you feel like your suspension's a bit average, it's not working like it did when it was new, you've got to hit up NS Dynamics. Get their hyper performance tune using lightweight or low friction, SKF seals. They from Racing Bros, they use nitrogen charged air chamber. They use premium oils, new seals in everything, and get your suspension working better than you. I need to send mine off ASAP because it's feeling a bit sticky. And if you've got a sticky shaft, you want to send it off, get the boys to fix it, and it'll be working better than you. Can't rate it high enough. Now, you'll probably listen to the last episode and we talked to Taylor Trails. Taylor Trails offer some pretty rad tours down in Tasmania. They don't just offer one tour though. They completely tailor a trail or tailor a tour of trails, hence Taylor Trails, to your experience, to what you want to do, to your time, whatever. They'll make sure that you get the best experience when riding in Tasmania, including a little bit of coaching as well, which is rad. So damn rad. Recently from Lead Out Sports, I received a new tool. It's very basic. It's basically a driver, but instead of using like a screw bit or a hex bit or a T25, it's basically you're able to swap out the bits in the end. It's got a holder for up to 2 bits within inside of it. And the best part, not that it's 3 tools in one, but it's got a bearing on the end, which is held in by a machined dial. So basically you can press on this dial, screw the screwdriver in, and it just makes life so easy. I know it doesn't seem like a whole game changer, but when you're doing a brake bleed with little 2 mils that you don't need an Allen key for, or especially setting up a rear derailleur, on axis, for example, we need that 3 mil. This thing makes life a breeze. So make sure you head over to leadoutsports.com.au or hassle your local bike shop to get some of these Pedro's tools in because damn, they are good. Franked, can't rate their stuff enough. Underneath this waterproof jacket that I just got, I've been wearing their lightweight AirTech jersey just so I'm not sweating like a walnut in the desert. It keeps me nice and dry, keeps the air flowing, super light, super flexible, absolutely love it. It's perfect for a nice light under layer for the jacket because if you wear too much under there, it gets a bit sweaty. Dirt surfers, man, I can't rate their custom printed mudguards enough. I've got a few of the boys running them, had a few people buy them, and no one has had any issues with them. Thanks to 100% recyclability and recycled materials, you can know that you're getting these things without cutting down any trees or ruining that beautiful environment that you want to ride in. Crush Oz, go get their premium service bucket. Keep your bike clean. Comes with degreaser, afterwash, bike wash, some brushes, and a bucket. Like, it's everything you need. I can't stress enough how much in this winter weather preventative maintenance and cleaning will keep your bike running better than you. Since we're on a winter theme as well, hit up Fist for their cold weather gloves. Thank me later. I don't need to say anything about them. Just go buy them and run them because they're damn good. Anyway, probably one of the longest intros I've ever done. Thanks for listening. Thanks for putting up with me. Enjoy this episode. And as per usual, grab beer, grab water, grab wine, grab whatever makes you happy, and hope you enjoy.
He behaves himself. Come here. No, he doesn't want to be picked up. All right. There's a dog there. I promise.
The collie.
Yeah.
The best.
He's behaving right now.
Yeah. They do that, and then they just decide to be dicks.
Yeah. Yeah, I think he got that out of his system for the last 2 hours. So
sick. Yeah. Mine's just waking up, so he'll be like that later on.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, good.
Sweet. Want to jump in and get this done?
Yeah. Yeah. Ready when you are.
Sick. Well, Dave Rome, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
It's good to have you on. Like, you're almost an Australian legend when it comes to wrenching and tools and everything else. So it's pretty rad to have you on.
I'm just a nerd.
I've come to the conclusion everyone that rides bikes, and especially into mountain bikes, are just nerds, but they're just trying to be cool about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Or at least anyone with a quiet bike is.
Yeah.
You
True.
can tell the ones on the trails that aren't, but yeah, I think it definitely attracts a certain mind, that's for sure.
How did you get into bikes? Let's wind it right back. Like, where did you start, and what kind of got you into it?
My dad was into mountain biking, not very much cross country mountain biking. He loved a good fire trail, and he was very keenly trying to get me into it from a young age, and I wasn't interested. I was sort of more playing soccer and found golf as a really cool 12-year-old. Basically ended up meeting some friends at high school that were into it, and through that got bitten pretty quickly. I think had a mountain bike for just a few months before I met up with someone that's invited me to a race, and that took it off, and it became a very expensive hobby very quickly.
Golf seems to be like a thing that mountain bikers just do to relax these days. Like, you look at a few of the downhillers
it's kind
are
of
really into
coming
it.
back around now, right? Like when cycling became the new golf, I think cyclists then took to golf. So it's I definitely don't pick up the clubs anymore, but it's I think there's quite a lot of similarities between the two sports. But so I was like, this real nerdy 12-year-old that loved just gear related to sport. Used to read all when I was like 10, I'd read all the magazines related to cricket bats, and then would obsess about soccer boots, and then would obsess about my golf clubs, and then cycling was like just this world of tech that was super exciting. So I was like this 14-year-old hanging out on weightweenies.com, and just I just got really into it and would annoy the guys at the local shop with really irritating questions. That's I'm sure it wasn't the best customer to them, but they were always good guys. And and that local shop, I guess, is also how I made my way through a career in cycling as well. Sort of fortunate enough to have some important people, I guess, working at a small local shop. So I think I was 15 and I met Mick Ross, who owns Flow Mountain Bike.
Yeah, right.
Because he was working at the local shop, and so I was one of the annoying kids to him, and eventually took me under his wing.
What era was this when you started to kind of get into it?
I'd say I was like, I'm early 30s, so it was what was it, like early 2000s? I was getting really into mountain biking. So yeah, I think my first good mountain bike was like a 2004 kind of iteration. So yeah, so pink bike was a thing. Everyone had Kona Stinkies on there. That was that was kind of my my entrance, but I was always the one wearing lycra.
What that would have been like the prime time for technology that actually started to work, right? Like before that, you had heaps of cool technology, but it was just pissing in the wind. Whereas now, at that point, it would have started to actually work.
Yeah, for sure. Like I remember like Hayes mags were kind of starting to be spec'd on a lot of bikes at that point. Tubeless tires were in their first year or two as far as getting, OE spec. And yeah, like there was a lot of good stuff coming in that actually worked really well. You could get an actually reliable mountain bike by the time I was already into the sport. So I am young enough to have skipped the days of wasting money on parts that didn't work.
Just lightweight stuff that would last one race.
Yeah, well, I found that stuff. I suddenly got myself into that world, but it turns out you do need all your disc brake rotor bolts.
Hard to miss.
Yeah. So.
Can you imagine running 3 bolts on like a 220 disc these days? It just...
Yeah, wouldn't work. I mean, I was running 160s and I thought I was light enough to get away with 3 titanium bolts, and that was the DNF that race.
Well, how did you kind of get into the shop life then? Was it just from pestering them and hassling them for so long and becoming a customer? Or?
Yeah, pretty much. So, for me, like I kind of always wanted to work on bikes, and before I was doing the shop life thing, I was very much working on my own bike and trying to save money by spending more money on tools than I would with servicing through the shop. Mm-hmm. I started getting like my own tools when I was like probably 14 years old. And, I didn't make the mistake of breaking my own bike. I'd break my father's instead.
Yeah, fair point. That sounds right.
And then I'd have to pay to get that fixed. But yeah, I don't know. It sort of quickly became the wrenching side of things quickly became as interesting to me as the riding. I'd spend as much time obsessing over how to knock off grams off the bike and how to tune things as I would with like the training and the racing and the actual riding of the bike. So for me, the shop life didn't actually start until like I did work experience in shops and I did, kind of helped out where I could, but for me, it didn't really start until like the day I finished high school.
Yeah. Okay.
I kind of knew while riding my bike and not going to school that I wanted to go into the bike industry. And before I'd even sort of, when I should have been focusing on my end of year, end of high school exams, I was actually just figuring out what shops I wanted to work in and handing out resumes and telling them when my start date was. So I remember like I finished my last exam for high school and then got in the car and drove straight to the shop to work out for my first day, like within an hour and a half. Like I had no time off. I just wanted to get started. So I was pretty keen on getting into it full time.
Yeah, that's epic. I mean, clearly not doing your exams properly and focusing on school didn't work out for you, right? Like,
I can't recommend that to anyone. It's definitely brought great angst to my parents, but I don't know. I think long term, I've managed to convince them that it's I haven't ruined everything. So
what is it? Sorry. What is it about the wrenching that was like super interesting to you at that time? Because most people these days and most groms that I see are just ready to slap corners and break their shit and, leave it in the shed.
Yeah, I don't know. I've kind of got a bit of a perfectionist personality, and I've always been really into like the design of products and how things work and making stuff as well. And I think the bicycle wrenching stuff was like a very accessible way to do that. Like car mechanics, for example, is something I've dabbled in very, very minorly, and I'm scared of it. It boggles my mind, some of the stuff related to cars, whereas bikes I find a little bit simpler and perhaps easier to master. But at the same time, they're a very technical product that's, to get a bike tuned perfectly, there's quite a lot to it. So yeah, I don't know. It started off like, for me, I guess it started as a cost saving thing to get the bike running as well as possible without having it in the shop every week or two. And then it sort of, from that, it just turned into a different obsession about, the hands-on side of things. I'd initially decided that I wanted to do industrial design. That would be my entry into the cycling industry. And through shops and through working in the industry, you meet enough industrial designers that aren't working as industrial designers. So that path didn't eventuate.
It's funny you mentioned like the car mechanics thing, because I know plenty of car mechanics and truck mechanics that don't want to work on bikes because it's too intricate. You put a bolt on a car, you wrench the shit out of it and go ahead, whereas they're not dealing with 3 Newton meters of torque on things. So
in some ways I think cars are better engineered in that regard. That I think they're more smart. They're often, not always, I know there's some true examples out there that this is not true for, but often, like when you're talking about a mainstream car, it's often engineered in a way that they know is going to be worked on by someone that's not using necessarily a calibrated torque wrench and that type of thing. Whereas I feel like the safety margin on bicycles is often quite a lot smaller. There are quite a few bikes out there, and I think the industry's gotten better at this, but there are quite a few bikes out there in the past that if you went 10% over the maximum torque on it, you broke it.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I mean, anytime I'm working on like that lightweight stuff, like AX components or Schmolke or something like that, it's just like, if you breathe on that thing too hard, it's gonna break.
Yeah. Yeah. That stuff's terrifying. Like, especially when it's not your own, that stuff is truly terrifying to work on. I
don't want to. Like, I really don't want to.
It gets your heart rate up though.
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
With adrenaline rush.
You just want to be in like a clean room with no noise or anything to focus on it. Cause it's, if shit goes wrong with that, it's quite a big deal. Especially like, I guess that's another thing when you refer to a car, like it's pretty hard to make those things completely implode and be life threatening. Whereas doing
they're not allowed to be, right? Like there's all sorts of standards in place and yearly testing required and all that ensures that they're actually road safe, whereas a bicycle can be a consumer themselves can work on their own brakes and not have to have an engineering certificate or not have to have it certified. So it's I think they're different worlds.
Did you ever go through like an apprenticeship or any qualifications like that as a mechanic?
I actually started doing a bicycle apprenticeship through my first like full-time shop, but it didn't. I think I kind of started at the time where the government was actually getting rid of it. So that didn't last very long, and then I wasn't at my first shop for very long, and then I got poached and ended up in wholesale.
Oh, wow. So that was pretty quick then.
Yeah. Like I had a pretty quick progression through the industry. I think I was 19 and I was managing BMC bicycles as a brand for the country. I kind of got thrown in the deep end pretty quickly. And I don't think I drowned. I don't know.
They're still here. So you didn't do everything wrong.
It was pretty cool. It was I was sort of a year in one of Sydney's pretty nice shops. Like I only handed out my resumes to like a couple of the really cool shops that were I guess seen to be doing nice things in the racing scene. And then ended up working for a large distributor that isn't as large anymore.
That's a lot of them. You're not really narrowing down anything there. Why were you like at 19? Why were you poached? What was the reasons you think that people were looking at you for that stuff?
It kind of comes back to like the bike industry is a little bit incestual. Like everyone knows everyone, and it's a pretty small industry in that sense. I guess when I mentioned that I got into racing really young, a Pat Howard that owns Lead Out Sports these days. He was actually like the club president of the local mountain bike club at that time. Right. I think he was in university, and it was just kind of something he did on the side. And my first mountain bike race, he was there, and kind of just stayed in touch through racing. And he was working at this distributor, and noticed that I was selling a lot of the bikes that they were importing. While I was in retail, I was selling quite a lot of these bikes, and they needed someone to handle customer service on the phone. And he was like, well, come on in.
Yeah, right.
So had a quick little interview with someone else, and job was mine. And it didn't take long to get other duties at that workplace.
I think it's I think bike racing in some aspects is the old school LinkedIn. like the amount and vast array of people working in different careers that race bikes. You can meet some pretty important people just out on a trail ride. But then when you get to racing and people know you and see work ethic, it can be a huge deal. Yeah, absolutely. So it's certainly the people I raced with over the years, I also worked with a lot of them. So I think it's very true. I think that's changed a bit these days. I think the industry's kind of, at least at the top end, I feel like it's gotten a lot more professional and a bit more vast, but it probably still applies to some extent. Yeah, I mean, there was a point where to become a manager, you just handed in your 1998 downhill local resume, and that's what got you the job, right?
So it's you just need to stand on a podium and you're offered a job at the local shop.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Was there a point where you were sitting in the offices managing the BMC brand, wishing you did better in your year 12 exams?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because like at that point in my junior years, I was just sort of racing on weekends, working during the week. Some of the people I was working with were pretty fast on a bike, like, a couple went to World Cups and that type of thing. And racing with them on weekends, and it was a pretty good life, and really enjoyed it. But the mismanagement from above, should I say, there was a few missteps, and I was like, ooh, I don't really want to be making these mistakes myself. Like this is, I think, there are better ways to do this, and I should probably go learn how to do them better. So, it was actually through that I was motivated to put myself back through school again. So,
so you went back to uni or something, or?
Yeah, started with like evening TAFE, and then did that for a couple of years and got a diploma, and then it was ready for the next step. I wanted to step up again in the industry, and figured I needed a degree for that. So I brought great pride to my accountant father, and I did a commerce degree.
Was that worth the time? Like, was what you learned from that translated into what you're kind of doing as a job?
I think so. Like, it still does come into relevance. So I did like a double major of marketing and international business.
Yeah.
And that's, from my point of view, I think it certainly played more strongly before I got myself into media.
Yeah.
But since getting myself into media, it suddenly helps me understand the reasons for why brands do what they do. Like I kind of understand the theory behind pricing strategy and like the way they turn over products or the way certain products fit into the range and what they're intended to do. So, I mean, it's not something I write about too often. I have done a bit of industry writing before, but like the pricing strategy is a big one for me, where I can see why an S-Works, for example, costs what it does, because the strategy behind that is to then sell a lot more of the model below it.
Yes. Yeah.
Um,
I'm pretty sure
yeah,
that's just a social experiment, though. They just want to see how much people will pay for a bike.
I think it's become that. Yeah. So
Yeah.
but good on them. They sell them.
They still keep, they put money back. I think that's the one thing that people always forget about Specialized is they put a fair bit of money back into the community.
They do. Yeah. Yeah. So, and they do good stuff.
They do. What, so how did you transition then from, managing BMC and working in that side of the industry to become into the media side of things? Was that a long transition or?
It was pretty quick, to be honest. It was, I went from, so when I was, my first shop job I had out of school, I already had Mick Ross, who was overseeing, the shop that I grew up with. He was already like the vice editor of Australian Mountain Bike Magazine at that point.
Yeah.
And that was his first job in media. And then the editor was Chris Southwood, which went on to be his business partner with Flo. And so I kind of got to know Chris and got to know Mick, and they were inviting me along to some of the Australian Mountain Bike Magazine group tests when I was like 18.
Yeah, right.
And it just never worked out. My racing schedule was a bit too busy or overlapped too closely with whenever they invited me spur of the moment to these group tests. And it was always like, keep me in mind, but I can't do it. And then when I joined the wholesale world, it was a conflict of interest. I wasn't going to be an independent resource for testing bikes at that point, because I was wearing a BMC hat and t-shirt and socks and all of it.
A tattoo.
Yeah. So I've had to cover that up. It's now a butterfly. And
good.
No, it's so that kind of just sat in the wings, and Mick and Chris, I think, continued to be with that magazine for quite a few years, overseeing that magazine together, and they did some really cool stuff. So as soon as I left wholesale, I was kind of back on the market for that. And they, once I was working in retail, because I was at university at this point, and so I was back working in bike shops, almost full time. And they called me up and started to get me involved in the magazine stuff at that point. So at first it was really just being almost like a talking head. Like I was there to be photographed, and I was there to give my opinion on bikes, but they would write it. And then they would occasionally they started to hand me some small products like a GPS computer, or I think like a Camelback or some multi-tools and a pump, that type of thing to review. And then through them, they were like, we pay our photographers more than we pay our writers. You should get a camera. And so, they mentored me, I guess, to a point where I was freelance, but I was basically in every magazine at one point. Whether for a bike review or a accessory or something else, I was on regular rotation with them. And I was still working in retail, and then they went and started their own thing. They started Flow, and they pulled me across.
It would have been, even now, but especially then, it would have been rare to have anyone that was full-time at media. Yeah,
I think Mick and Chris were. I think media back then was actually bigger than it is now. You had more magazines, and I think they were the people that ran the magazines were at least full-time with them. I think for websites, it was probably less full-time people. I think we're still on a day of print being ruling the way, but and then, sorry, I'm just getting distracted by a puppy eating a power cord. Right.
That's right.
I've forgotten where I was at.
Something about media and more magazines and stuff like that.
But anyway, it's they were giving me quite consistent work, but not enough to live off of. It was kind of a hobby at that point for the media side of things, and it was also a creative outlet for me, because I felt like I was creating something. Whereas in a shop, you're working on bikes and you're selling bikes or whatever you're doing, but I wasn't actually producing something that I could say I made that.
Yeah.
So, and that was what I loved about the media side of things. And yeah, basically at turn of events, the whole knowing people and the whole small industry thing paid off again, because that's how I ended up getting full-time work by having a friend who worked for Cycling News, and he was leaving, and he was like, you should go for an interview, and there's a spot, and I think you'd be good for it. And that opened an unexpected door.
Do you think a little bit tangential for what you were saying with media work and photographers, but do you think like at the moment the market is so diluted with so much talent in especially like photography and in some respects quality reviewers, like it's almost harder to become full-time because there's so many people doing it, like a magazine can just go get someone else?
Yeah, I think there's quite a lot of factors there. For me, like what I see the biggest limitation is that the market's too diluted. Not that there's too much talent, but that you've got all these media outlets that are all kind of scraping by in a sense.
Yeah.
Like they're all trying to figure out they've all transitioned from print to digital, but not all of them have figured out how to make money along the way, which is kind of means they're failing at the key mission of a business. But and then at the same time, you've got the YouTube generation and the social media generation that are almost willing to do it for free or do it in exchange of product. And they're creating, in often cases, they're creating truly professional quality content. But they're taking a voice away from the media outlets that are trying to make it a sustainable business to have employees. I think there's a lot of issues there, but there's only so much money to support the media industry.
Yeah. 100%.
And a lot of the media industry, it used to be print sales were part of it, but most of it came from advertising. And I think the advertising dollar has changed because that's now split between racing, it's split between influencers, it's split between events, and then media as well. And I think that hasn't left a lot on the table for new entrants, I guess.
And it's kind of, do you ever see, like, as a guy that's worked in shops, you know, you've built up a reputation, you've got the skills and you've got the ability to truly understand what a bike is doing. And then sometimes you see, not that this is everyone, but sometimes you see like a YouTube review or an influencer doing a air quotes review on something. Is it kind of disappointing to see where that industry's gone with that type of stuff?
It is, yeah. And especially knowing some of the background, like a lot of the stuff on YouTube is paid content. And knowing that from a user, from a person looking to buy their first bike, they're not going to know that review on YouTube is paid for versus something that I'm creating or one of my colleagues is creating is truly independent. And I don't believe there's an easy way for that to come through in the content. And I think from the consumer's point of view, they're both a bike review. And I think it's a shame. And I also think it's a shame in that it's become so common for the whole pay to play thing where advertisers buy their space to have bike reviews. That is truly very common in the bike industry. That's become so common that even when you don't do that, people assume that you do.
Yeah.
So it's kind of discredited and cheapened the entire industry because now the readers no longer value reviews from magazines or from websites because they assume everyone is on the take, right? And it's like, that's just not, it's not the case. There are actually still quite a few media outlets that keep their advertising completely separate from
their reviews,
from their editorial, but you can't. Yeah, there's no way to prove that to people because the perception is you see a review for a Trek and then there's an advertisement banner above it from Trek. Yeah. And you're like, well, put 1 + 1 = 2 in that case.
Yeah.
Even if the person writing the review had no idea that the advertising team had sold advertising to Trek.
100%.
So, and that's the reality of it is that unfortunately from a reader's point of view, their assumption is that it's all paid for. And then from an editor's point of view, even when they're doing everything right, it's all you can do is be as critical of the product as you can, sometimes even mean, to try prove that you're independent.
Yeah. And I guess like with the YouTube thing as well, and that influencer style review people see it as more of a raw kind of insight into that person, so they tend to believe it more, I think.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like it's a more personal level of content. You're seeing a person talk directly to the camera, talk to you. Whereas most of what I do, I mean, I do the talking stuff to camera as well, but most of what I do is written without my face in front of it, and it's a bit more soulless in that regard. So it's certainly, there's a reason why Spikes Hacks and that type of channel ended up having 1 million followers. It's more than, I think probably more than what Pink Bike has as a YouTube channel. And it's because of the personal contact. It's you feel like it's a person speaking to you with their experience, not a soulless corporation that is looking to grasp at your money wherever they can.
What was, I guess, one of the hardest things for you to do when you started reviewing product? Was there any challenges or?
Yeah, I mean, each outlet that I've worked for, each publication that I've worked for has had its own challenges and quirks. I think when I first started reviewing bikes, it was probably just the written word was what I struggled with most. I was really self-conscious with my writing, and but thankfully, like going back to Mick and Chris, they had the patience to edit me nicely and make me sound more intelligent than I really was. I think that's a key thing, is good sub editors and people that you trust around you. But that was definitely the biggest challenge for me. Like, I had the technical knowledge. I sort of knew what I wanted to say. I just didn't know how to say it.
Yeah, right.
And then, I guess from there, soon enough, it was the photography was the challenge. That was a whole new skill set to learn, and it was a pretty high benchmark to meet. But your first photos that you're taking are going to be printed in a magazine. And you're getting paid for them. So, so it was definitely a steep learning curve. But each one you overcome, and you work with people that are understanding that it's a new skill set for you.
Was it hard to ever politically correctly say in a nice way that the product is shit? Like, have you ever had to do that? Is it hard? One of the first
bikes I ever reviewed was a certain Indonesian brand that do consumer direct, and I was the first person to review a bike from them for Australia, I believe, and it was for Australian Mountain Bike Magazine, and it was one of their early dual suspension bikes, and it had, for example, like the rear shock had less than the thickness of a piece of paper between that and the linkage.
Good.
So like the sag O-ring itself would get stuck between the linkage and the shock when it was at full top out. And it's like, as soon as you get any bearing play or as soon as you get any bushing play in the system, you're going to rub the shaft of the shock. You're going to damage the shock. And basically I had to, one of my first bike reviews was a very, very negative review. And that was tough because certainly Australian Mountain Bike Magazine back then, they would definitely try to play gentle. I'd say, like, I don't think they do this anymore, but it was very diplomatic, all their reviews. So you could come out and say, this is a problem, this is a problem, this is a problem. But at the end of the day, you always had to put it in an angle that was still fair to the brand, that you weren't going to upset the brand forever. And yes, I suddenly that review went through a series of editing.
Yep.
And still wasn't polite to the brand. But yeah, certainly there were times, and Mick and Chris were very good at that, as far as, keeping the intent of the review and the true opinion of the review while still making it fair for the brand, that the brand wasn't going to end up out of business.
Well, yeah, you got that, and you want the brand to come back to you for reviews later on, and you want to offer them redemption in some ways.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the most enjoyable parts of my job is I get to see the iteration of the product that I might have reviewed it 2 or 3 years ago, and I'll get to see the new product and they've fixed the 5 things that I complained about. And it kind of makes me feel like I had a direct play in the development of that product. And sometimes the engineers admit it. They're like, oh, it was your review that made us do this. Other times it's a subtle, like, oh, we improved this for no reason at all. But yeah, it's definitely a cool part of the job is sort of having that sway and leading to better products for everyone, hopefully.
I think, journalists and guys doing the reviews and doing the product testing have quite a fair bit of say in a lot of stuff, which I think is cool. It's not just written and put out for the customers. I think the guys that actually do it right have some influence on the products, it's so good to see.
Yeah. And that's definitely one of the coolest parts of my job. I mean, absolutely, like I want the consumer to get the best product they can so they can have the best experience they can have and not waste their money. But at the same time, knowing that there's that side, and then there's also the side of like furthering the industry is quite cool. Like actually making products better and calling out products that aren't good enough for people's money, and often writing why and what they should do to fix that. And as you said, like allowing that brand to get redemption is cool. It doesn't always happen, but sometimes, you might have a product that's flawed in some way, and then 2 years later, it's amazing.
And there's definitely, I think, some bike companies that are wary of that. I mean, when's the last time you saw an Evil on Big Bike or an Envy review on Big Bike? And there's reasons behind that. Yeah.
I mean, there's certainly some stuff behind the scenes that I won't get into, but yeah, certainly if you're like Pink Bike are really good media in that they're pretty much open to accept anything. For review, they'll give it a go. But yeah, I mean, certainly some brands, rightly so. I mean, Pink Bike's got an insane reach.
Yeah,
they're the biggest reach in mountain biking. So yeah, if they don't like a product, then a brand probably would be gun shy to give them a second product.
Yeah. You mentioned photography. Getting into that, was that a passion of yours beforehand, or was it literally just something you got told to do? So
my father was a photographer.
Okay.
In his younger years, not a full pro, but like amateur photographer, and used to try to get his images published and all that. So he was always kind of putting a camera in my hand as a kid.
Yeah, cool.
I just didn't like it. I never took to it. But yeah, suddenly once I was told that I'd get paid for doing it.
It's way better then.
And I'd get paid for doing it and the money would be better than the words. Then yeah, I mean, I was pretty quick to ask my dad for that camera again.
Yep.
And yeah, it didn't take me long to get pretty hooked on that, because turns out camera gear is good for nerds as well. So
I was thinking that exact same thing as I was asking the question. I'm like, you would have gone deep into it, because I'm the same. Like you start to read about camera gear and you get real nerdy really quickly.
Yeah. It's amazing how many like truly passionate cyclists also are quite into cameras. Like there's quite a lot of overlap there, and it's you can see why. Like the tech is cool. Like there's a whole world of camera gear tech out there, and I would say I'm at an intermediate level as far as the gear goes.
I think there's also a certain, without getting too like woo-wah and spiritual about it or whatever, but there's certain ways that like you can interpret the terrain on a bike, but also with a camera for the wilderness. And like, I think you see that, like, it's a Sven Martin photo, like, it's a Boris photo, like you just know, and that's because of the way they're interpreting that terrain. And I think sometimes that shows through quite a bit.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I mean, it's a skill like cycling. You know, with each ride, you kind of can push your limits and progress from it. And I feel like photography is a very similar thing where you can see progress basically with each time you go out, and with each use, you get faster at using the camera, and you end up taking better photos, and you get a better eye for what works, and you stop pushing the shutter with every single opportunity.
You're slowly editing 300 photos instead of 3,000. That's when you're getting better.
Yeah. Although I still edit 1,000 at a time, but still got room to grow. But I think there's quite a lot of similarities between it. Like the progression and the tech, and there's, I guess, the things that get you really hooked on cycling are present when it comes to the photography side of things as well. Yeah,
and they're still hanging with your mates, drinking beers, trying to take photos. It's a good time.
Exactly. So with the photos, like I was again fortunate enough with who I had around me. Like Chris Southwood's a good photographer. Mick Ross became completely obsessed with it around the time that I was working with him. Yeah, right. And he started to, I did a few shoots like Chris Benny, for example, who is now like a famous automotive photographer. But seeing Mick kind of get to a point where his photos were often as good, if not better, than some of those guys. And I had Mick on more than a few occasions would set up the camera for me and just hit the button. I'm going to ride through, just hit the button. And stuff like that. Like you learn quickly, and you're learning off really, really good people. And then more recently, I do a lot of work with like Tim Bardsley-Smith these days, who's another iconic photographer. Used to do a lot of World Cup stuff. Used to be published on Vital MCB all the time. I guess I've surrounded myself with people to learn off of. And then another important person in my media side of things is a guy called Andrew Harris, who a friend from Melbourne, old family friend. And he was like a photojournalist for quite a few years. He had centerfolds of Qantas magazine and all sorts of stuff. I had him mentoring me as well along the way. So I guess I had the right people in my corner pushing me to do better and get the right gear and figure it out. So it's certainly, I don't think I'd be where I am today without being under the wing of some others.
The photo community is so good for that too. Like no one really cares if you're getting better than them. Like that kind of makes them to push harder, and then everyone's just it's like everyone's building on their own. It's quite cool to see.
It is cool, yeah. And I think the other aspect, as you say, is like everyone's got their own style. It's kind of hard to be the exact same as another photographer. Unless you're like, shadowing them and shooting over the top of them in every single corner. But I think in that sense, it's like everyone takes their own spot and ends up with a unique shot. And it is cool. Like it's for me, I love that, like what you hear from World Cups where someone's card will get corrupted in the rain, and like the likes of Sven Martin or Boris will jump in and give the other shooter their photos to publish, so they have something for the day that they can get paid for and have money to turn up at the next event. And that is such a cool community. That's something you don't hear about too often on the road side of cycling that I do work in. So
I bet that'd be like cutthroat, I reckon, up there. But I mean, there's been plenty of times I've been sitting on the side of a racetrack and the photographers are just, the banter is next level, and we're all just talking shit, and no one cares what photo you're getting or who you're selling to or what you're doing. It's just a good time. That's part of the reason it's so enjoyable.
Yeah. Well, you're all out there for the same reason, right? So you're like, it's you're already friends based on that. So
we've all decided to sit in the rain or get sunburnt.
Yeah.
So we might as well have fun while we're doing it.
It's in the rain, destroying the camera gear that you don't get paid enough to have.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I guess, like, how did you get into the road side of things as well? Because now you're mainly part of Cycling Tips, which is predominantly road.
Yeah, it was kind of, there's more money on the roadside, right? Like when you look at the cross country athletes that transitioned over to the road for the money, the media side is no different. Road cycling media is incredibly strong with a lot of competition, whereas mountain bike media has 2 or 3 very large players that dominate. So on the road side, there was more opportunity. And for me, it was that friend that told me to go for their role at Cycling News. I ended up going for that job, which was actually for the head of sales of Cycling News. Which for me, I was like, kind of just out of uni, and I was like, well, I wouldn't mind learning about digital advertising and the digital world, and I'll figure that out. And it's not something I want to do at all, but it sounds interesting. And I went for that job interview, and they're like, well, we didn't think we'd find the right person, but we're actually looking to launch Bike Radar in Australia. And we need an editor to handle that. And your resume is actually quite ideal for it. Would you rather just interview for that job instead of this sales job that doesn't sound you very passionate for? And I was like, yes, let's interview for that instead. And basically just by pure coincidence, ended up becoming the editor of Bike Radar. And then through that, Bike Radar, they had MB UK magazine. What else do they have? What Bike, I think, or What Mountain Bike magazine, I think was one of them, which is more UK centric. They had a few road magazines, and Bike Radar was kind of their website to all of it. So my time was split across mountain bike and cyclocross back then, and commuter and road. But yeah, because I guess my mountain bike side was the cross country end of things. I was already doing a bit of road racing, and I was already had more lycra than I owned baggies. So in that sense, it was kind of a natural progression. And although my passion is mountain bike, I was just as comfortable writing about road tech. So yeah.
Was it harder to write about road tech, or is it easier? Or
it's certainly more boring. It's
I didn't want to say that, but
it's I've done a few articles on this, but basically road tech doesn't progress like mountain bike tech does. And there's a few reasons for it, but the UCI is a big part. The UCI controls the development of road tech quite fiercely. The other part is that road's not a progressive sport. So fitness is progressive, like, people are getting stronger all the time, and technology and sports science is getting better, but the tech itself doesn't necessarily need to change because the roads aren't changing.
True.
Whereas a mountain bike track, look at cross country over the last 10 years, and it's actually gotten pretty extreme. And the technology has changed as a result of that. People have gone from hardtails with 80 mil travel suspension forks and negative stems and twitchy handling to basically what's a modern trail bike. And that makes mountain bike tech much more interesting to write about. Road, it's kind of like the pointed edge of cycling tech. You see the first developments in materials there. You see the most money there, most expensive bikes. But yeah, it's at the same time the tech moves pretty slowly.
It does, but sometimes I find like them ways of the minuscule changes they do to make this simple 2-triangle design work better. Is also quite interesting. It
is, yeah. And when you really get into it, it's pretty amazing that a 650 gram disc brake frame rides as well as it does and exists for the first, in the first part. And there is some interesting stuff in that space. But for me, I still look to the mountain bike space as where things are most interesting. And then that sort of helps me figure out what's coming on the road. Yeah,
true. You can see what's about to happen.
Yeah. And it's been quite cool to be like what were, originally a mountain bike tech writer, and then have road bikes now. Disc brakes are common and tubeless tires are becoming common, and all these things that I wrote about and predicted 10 years ago and I was told I was wrong, and they're sort of all coming to fruition now. So it's a good time to be confident with that tech and be writing about it.
Has the what's the word here? Has the popularity of gravel been quite interesting to watch as well, seeing them recreate 90s mountain bikes and make them drop bar. And
Yep. I jokingly, like at the start of the gravel, like when gravel was just starting to become popular, I think Specialized had just had their first bike out. I was joking that flat bar gravel bikes were the future.
Yep.
I know Lockie supports me on this one. I love gravel bikes, and I think they're an awesome gateway into getting mountain bikers onto road bikes and road cyclists onto mountain bikes. And I think we're starting to see that. It's been a bit of a slower transition than what I'd initially thought would happen. But yeah, I think that for me is the most exciting part of gravel bikes. I think the trend is a little bit overhyped.
Yep.
I think it's made my 100%. Work a lot more exciting to have a different kind of drop bar category to write about. And I think there's a lot of people that have road bikes that are now getting gravel bikes instead. And that's quite a cool trend because they're deciding that being off-road is safer and more exciting than road. But I also think there's a lot of people that are buying gravel bikes that should just buy a mountain bike.
100%. Yeah.
And they're getting gravel bikes and like, oh, off-road scary. And it's like, well, you're actually riding a mountain bike single track, which is, it's in the name, it's not gravel bike single track. So it's, so I think that progression of switching to the most appropriate bike has been slow. And I think there's a thing called underbiking that's sold a lot by the industry.
Yeah.
Where you use a gravel bike in terrain that it's unsuitable for. I think that I'm guilty of it. That's how I test all my gravel bikes, but I think that is slightly overrated. I think it's fun for people that have mountain bike skills and that would otherwise find some of their more mellow trails or fire trails boring, and a gravel bike can make it exciting. I think that's great. But I think road cyclists coming into off-road segments without any skills should be on a bike that makes it as easy as possible for them.
100%.
Not that makes it dangerous.
Yeah. Underbiking for the skilled rider is fun. Like I loved having a gravel bike and sending it down all mountain trails. Like it's the best fun ever. Yeah. It's scary, dangerous.
It's terrifying.
But it makes that like otherwise pretty boring trail pretty interesting.
It does. Yeah. Yeah.
And
then it's kind of like the modern night riding in a way. Like night mountain biking was always that. Like it would turn trails that you'd mastered and were now finding boring, and like it would give a whole new dimension to it. And I kind of feel like gravel bike does that, but in the daytime.
I found like for my mates that ride roadie as well, they just, as you said, they just froth the gravel bike because it's more versatile and they can just get off the road when they don't need to be on it.
And it's cool. Like it's being actively marketed to them as the cool thing.
Yeah, this is true.
It's the adventure side is much cooler than the old school road suffering side. But yeah, at the same time, I think cross country is going to continue to grow from it. And we're starting to see that. But yeah, I think the return of cross country is just around the corner.
Well, I think the bikes have made it so much better. Like, as you said, like the terrain and stuff they're riding at the top has made the bikes better, which has made XC riding more interesting and fun. Yeah,
exactly. Like the whole down country category is just, exploded in popularity.
Yeah, aka trail bikes. Yeah.
AKA lightweight trail bikes, which are cross country bikes.
Yeah.
So it's I think it's cool to see where the industry's going. And I know a lot of mountain bikers, like gravity side mountain bikers, especially younger ones, are like quite antsy the whole idea of road cyclists being on their trails, but it'll be good for them. It's more money in the sport. It's more money for trails. It's more interest from your government funded trails. It's more people on bikes is only positive.
Yeah, this is true. It's something I got to remember every now and then. Every time I see a new blue trail pop up, I remember that that's more money in the sport. No, I agree. But yeah, it's funny seeing Lockie's gravel bike, which is the Cannondale hardtail thing. She just rips. It's so sick.
Yeah. I've been trying to build up something similar. I've got a 29er carbon hardtail, but it's just getting a bit old. I've been trying to build up something fresh for like the whole pandemic. So, I'm just hoping to have it finished before the next pandemic arrives.
I was going to ask about that. How is it working? Because you travel a fair bit, right? Like you have to as a part of what you do. But how was it during the pandemic, trying to work and review stuff that just didn't exist or you couldn't travel for?
There was challenges. Certainly, like a lot of my work is travel or reviewing upcoming product or new product, and both of those stopped. So the travel it was almost a blessing in disguise because I had too much booked. I was definitely, I was traveling through Phoenix Airport in April of 2020 for a work trip, and I don't know if you look up the spread of COVID through the US, they basically trace it back to the day that I was coming through. Like they trace it back to Phoenix Airport and like the day I was there as like the web of where COVID exploded from for the US.
So what you're saying is you started COVID in the US? Is that what you're telling?
I think so. Yeah, from what I can decipher from like the New York Times, it sounds like it's my fault.
Yeah.
So
damn roadies.
Yeah. So yeah, that at that point I'd had, I think that was my third or fourth trip for the year already, and I had back to back. I was meant to go to Europe a week later, and I was meant to be in Taiwan a week after that, and then I was meant to be somewhere else a week after that, and I was like properly getting stressed.
Yeah.
Like anxiety was building over the idea of just endless work trips, and each work trip, like I don't mean to complain because this is like a true dream job, but
yeah,
what each work trip means is that whatever work you have waiting for you goes on hold. And then you spend a week away learning about the new product that then becomes another week of work to write about while your previous work remains on hold. Yeah. So with each work trip, you're losing basically 2 weeks, and then the stuff just keeps building and building and building. So, having that all of a sudden canceled was quite a relief, and it let me actually focus on the stuff that I already had waiting to do. Then from the new product side of things, like, my job is to review products, but it's actually one of the parts of my job I don't love doing. I prefer to spend my time on writing like informational pieces, stuff like resources of, one-stop shops for tubeless tires or for chains or for tools and stuff like that actually anyone with a bike can benefit from. And I really love doing that style of content, and not having as much review product coming in actually lets me do that rather than focus on just chasing my tail with trying to give my opinion on the latest thing.
Is that like coming from your roots of working in bike shops, you reckon, of getting people on bikes and teaching them how to do things properly?
I think so. It's certainly like working in shops, you see things done the wrong way a lot. A lot of bikes that come in, you're like, oh, that could have been avoided. That could have saved you a lot of money. And I think for me, to get more people on bikes and to get people experiencing riding the best they can, I think a lot of the information out there is detrimental to that. And while there's so much I want to do and there's so little that I can actually do, I do try to create content that's genuinely useful and that will hopefully make a positive difference for people, whether it's saving them money or just making their ride more enjoyable. And that's certainly why I tend to gravitate towards writing about tools and that type of thing, because it's content that others aren't doing and that I feel I can do better.
Well, I mean, like, you just have to look at Cool Tool Tuesday and see the explosion of that and what that means to a lot of people. Like, 'cause no one does anything around that except really you.
Yeah. And that was a bit of a challenge in itself. Like for years at Cycling Tips, I was told to do less tool stuff because it was a distraction to the stuff that was really, that our readers en masse were really asking for, like, our opinions on mainstream bikes and that kind of thing. And the tools were quite niche. And then, we got, it was the acquisition with Outside recently, which involves Pink Bike and a few others. And that's through that, we were told editors should try own niches, small niches, and try to be experts in it. And I was like, they're like, hey, Dave, here's a great idea. That niche that you keep trying to do that we keep telling you not to do, why don't you do that? So that's been good. It's been cool to have that column, that tool focus column. It's definitely a nice little creative outlet for me.
What was I wanted to go down and talk about, but you mentioned outside. And then what was the transition like when they kind of acquired Cycling Tips and, they did Pink Bike and unfortunately Beta they experimented with, but didn't end up working. Like, has that been a rough transition or? No,
not particularly. Media is a game of acquisitions.
Mm-hmm.
At least at the large scale side of things. So when I was a Bike Radar, I went through an acquisition there. We went from Future Publishing to Immediate Media, which is kind of like BBC Print.
Mm-hmm.
And then they went through an acquisition. So yeah, I mean, I'd been through it before, and it's not always negative. Often the acquisitions come with renewed focus or renewed energy and resources. And so, I joined Cycling Tips when they had just been acquired by Bike Exchange.
Okay.
And then a few years later, they got acquired by Pink Bike.
Yep.
And that was actually a truly positive change.
I bet.
It was much more aligned, and being part of Pink Bike was awesome. And I dabble a bit on Pink Bike, and they're just a good team, good group of people. And then, that whole group, that whole Pink Bike group, which included Cycling Tips, last year got acquired by Outside. And again, it actually was positive. Like, they kind of left us alone, and they infused cash into us, and we made some new hires and grew further. Things are changing now. Like, it's a company that is starting to find its feet, I guess. They were growing very rapidly at the time they acquired us.
Yeah.
They're trying some things, and they're trying to really figure out what their long-term strategy is at the moment. For the most part, we've still been left alone. We're still business as usual. Same for Pink Bike. I'd say to their credit, the most positive thing is like not once have been asked to change what I'm writing about or change my opinion on something. They've really left the editorial side of things untouched, because
it works.
They paid a lot of money for us because we were doing good things. So they trust that we know what we're doing better than they know what they're doing. Well, better than they know what we're doing, should I say.
True.
Yeah. So, and that's really positive. So it's, for now, it's still a very positive space, but media is a challenging business. So
it is. It's crazy.
I'm not assuming that everything will always be great, but for now, the website's still growing. It's, like Pink Bike, it's still allowing us to do cool content. I'm still getting paid to spend my days on things I enjoy doing. So I really can't complain. Yeah.
All right. That was a cool little tangent, but let's get back onto tools because it's the main thing I'm interested in. I guess what is it about tools that you love? Because man, from what I've seen, you have a metric shit ton of stuff in your shed.
Yeah, it's a bit of a problem. Actually, it goes back to like the design. I think it's for me, like it's tool design is like just such a fundamental basis of nice design, and it leads to the nice design of other products. You use tools to make other things. So for me, it kind of just centers around the idea of like enjoying making things, enjoying using my hands, and then I enjoy good design, and that tools kind of are at the center of all of that. And nice tools especially. So there's very appreciable differences between a cheap tool that is designed to do the task but add nothing to the task, and then a quality tool that's had a huge amount of design and effort put into it, that's designed to feel great and do that same task but do it better, whether it's more efficient or more accurate or be more durable at it, whatever it is. For me, it's cool to be able to feel those differences by hand. And I feel like that's kind of modern society, it's almost like it's not a lost art, but it's like, it's not as common, right? Like an iPhone doesn't change, the design of an iPhone doesn't change that much. It's more the software, and you don't really have like this feeling, like this tactile feeling of the advancements that they make with each iteration. Whereas with tools, it's very obvious. You can pick up a Park tool or a Pedro's or an Abbey or whatever it is, and you can straight away feel the differences between them and the design differences, and in some cases the reasons why they did something, sometimes, or not do something. And you can feel like, this one has been made to be expensive, or this one has been made to hit a price point, whatever it is. So yeah, for me, I just enjoy it. And then from that, it became a weird, sick obsession. So very, very expensive obsession.
I see
and it's just completely out of control now.
Yeah, like it is crazy that I never really thought of it like that. But the amount of, like, when you have a specific tool that is made for that purpose and it's made well, it is an absolute game changer.
Yeah.
Compared to a tool that's just supposed to get the task done. Yeah,
exactly. And there are mechanics out there that would quite happily use a flat blade screwdriver for 20 different purposes. That's cool. Like, if you make it work and whatever, like, you do you, that's cool. But for me, I like the idea of finding something that just does a task better. And it doesn't always make sense for someone to own that tool, but for me, it's like the journey and the pursuit of actually finding that product and figuring out how to do a common task better, or to a higher level, or make it easier for the user. I get a kick out of that. So, and that's, an endless journey. There's always ways to make something more efficient. There's always ways to improve on the existing. And, often that involves thinking a bit outside the box and thinking, like, questioning how you do something currently and the tools available to do that currently, and whether there's a different approach. Yeah.
I think, like, the biggest one I've seen is that new Shimano bleed kit, where they've finally just did 2 little tweaks and it makes the job so much better and so much easier.
Like that little metal insert into the hose, so you don't have to, you're not squeezing the hose over the top and letting it fall off all the time and you bleed and having to start your bleed again.
Yep. Yeah. Or just having the anti-spill lip on the cup.
Oh, yeah.
Game changer. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, little things like that I get a kick out of. But at the same time, like, that Shimano kit is much more expensive than it used to be, and is quite flimsy feeling. So it's still room for improvement.
I still use my own little cup that I've got made, but
that's it.
What do you think? I guess, do you think Abbey tools and what those guys are doing in the high end kind of tool born aspect, do you think that's worth it for most home mechanics? Or
so, like, I will rewind a bit from that question and say Abbey Bike Tools has changed the game. They they came into the industry at a time where the gold standard was Park Tool. Perfectly functional tools that hit a price point that you can run a bike shop off of and run a profitable bike shop off of and do good stuff with. And Abbey decided there's better ways to do a handful of tools, and they pinpointed the areas for improvement and just did those. So they just did like a cassette tool, and they just did a derailleur hanger tool, and all they wanted to do was just figure out the few areas where things could be better and improve on them. And I think by what they did, it actually forced all the other tool brands to step up their game. And I actually think a lot of the tool brands have stepped up the ergonomics or the quality or the speed of use of their tools. Like Park Tool, for example, before Abbey existed, Park Tool didn't have an integrated cassette tool. You'd grab your cassette socket and you'd grab a shifter spanner or their socket holder, and you'd screw them together. And in theory, you'd have 3 tools in your hand for every time you wanted to remove a cassette. And Abbey Bike Tools sort of made it the norm to have 1 tool for the cassette and one, and then a chain whip. So you're grabbing 2 tools instead of 3. So I think Abbey deserves a lot of credit for kind of changing the game early on in that they raised the quality and they made people think about the efficiency of things and elegant design. That said, there's not a huge amount that Abbey does that I think is a must-have for home mechanics. It's all like a nice to have, and if you can afford it, then yes, you won't regret it. Like you'll never regret buying a really good tool because you'll have it forever. True. It'll always do its job really well. It holds its value pretty well. Whereas a cheap tool, you might break it eventually and then you'll regret buying the cheap one and you'll then figure out that you want the more expensive one at that point. So if you start with the more expensive one, you'll never regret it. But I think when you look at Abbey's tool range, there's not a lot in there that you have to have.
True.
There's cheaper options out there that for the casual user will often do a job almost as good and will last them sufficiently given that it's likely to only see casual use.
I think like the efficiency thing comes into play as well, because if it saves you 2 seconds per 3 months of changing your cassette compared to 2 seconds of 50 cassette removals in a day, then it makes a difference for sure.
Yeah, exactly. So there's casual home users out there that might only use it once a year, but they just appreciate nice things. You know, they might have a coffee machine at home that has brass knobs on it. And you know, if that's you, then sweet, get the Abbey. You'll love it. But no, I don't think that the person looking to work on their bike every 6 months or change a cassette when it wears out on their own personal bike, Abbey bike tool stuff is awesome and it's what I use, but I think you'll be just as happy with, you know, a Pedro's or a Park or a Uni or whatever it is. All of those tool brands will have something that'll get the job done, and your bike probably won't know the difference.
And those brands are now stepping it up. Like it's so much better. Like yeah.
So for the most part, I mean, there are still some areas where things could be better, but for the most part, all those brands are generally speaking offering pretty reliable choices these days. But that said, I mean, I've heard Lockie on this podcast before mention like his Abbey bike tools hanger tool.
Yeah.
And like bar none, like I did a shootout on Cycling Tips not that long ago of hanger tools where I just tested them all, as you do. And the Abbey was by far and away the best. It's like the only one on the market. It's the fastest to use. It's the nicest to use, but it's the only one on the market with like zero play in it. So when you're adjusting the 12-speed Eagle, the hanger tool itself is not bringing any loose tolerance into the mix. There's no variability in the measurement. It's just the measurement's exactly right. Whereas with a Uni or a Park tool, the tool itself has a little bit of play in it. So you can kind of rock the tool back and forth, which gives you, you know, a millimeter or so out of the ability to be out of tolerance by a millimeter or so. So in that sense, the Abbey does do a better job.
Yeah.
But the others will get you close enough.
Yeah, like I've got the Uni one. It's got play in it. You can do the grommet to get rid of the play, but then you can't spin the damn thing around.
Yeah.
Like it's
So it's annoying. Like it's a bit annoying to use, but you'll get your derailleur set up to the point where every shift will still be perfect by using that tool. So
man, hanger alignment for legal is one of the most important things ever with that drivetrain.
Yes.
The amount of people that say Eagles suck, and you look at that derailleur hanger and it's off by 5 degrees, and you're just like, well, that's why it's not Eagle's fault. Yeah. All the modern components, whether Shimano or SRAM, you can pretty much guarantee they can shift perfectly if they're set up right. Yeah.
And if you're on Eagle or if you're on Shimano, and assuming you haven't bent the derailleur against a rock, the derailleur itself, I mean, and it's not shifting well, then it's your own fault.
Yeah. Or they're just worn. Like they're completely flogged. The amount of times Eagle sucks. You look at the derailleur and it's like 5 years old and never been lubed. You're just like, there's your problem there. Yeah,
if you're hearing your derailleur rattle down a trail, then it's you've had your use out of it.
What's one tool you could probably you can't do without?
Should have planned for this. I don't know. I've kind of got like in my workshop, I've got a tool wall where all the most used stuff ends up on the wall and is most easily grabbed. So like anything on that wall is kind of, to me, like critical. So I've got multiple different sets of hex keys on there.
Yeah.
Is probably the thing you use most. So the mistake, I wouldn't say it's a mistake, but the area of efficiency that I see most people could get better at is having different sets of hex keys. So, because like the L keys, like classic and will fit pretty much anywhere on a bike, but it doesn't always fit efficiently. Like you might be forced to use it a quarter turn at a time and then replace it in the bolt. So for me, I use a bunch of like ratchets with bits on them, and then L keys. And then I've got like the P handle, like T handle kind of keys for like doing disc brakes with. And then probably the most underappreciated from what I see is screwdriver style hex keys. So you imagine like your Phillips head screwdriver, but with like a hex at the end of it. Those are awesome because you can do like lever reach on brake levers with them, and all of a sudden adjusting your lever reach becomes easy. Or limit screws, like they're perfect for doing Eagle limit screws, or new Shimano 12-speed limit screws. Anything like that. It's I think look at your hex key selection and add another. Can't have too many.
Like I just got that bit driver from Pedro's.
With
the bearing at the end.
Yeah, so that's like a screwdriver. Yeah,
that's a game changer.
Yeah,
I didn't need to buy 100 screwdrivers or screwdriver Allen keys. Yeah, and it just does everything for me. But having like head stem installs just got so much easier, or doing those little things. And I think when you're working in a shop or need to do things fast, it's such a game changer.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, I'd argue that not everyone's going to agree with me on this. I know from what I can understand, Mick's toolbox is quite the mess, and he probably wouldn't agree with me on this. But I think there's joy to be had in doing things efficiently, but worst case scenario, you end up just having more time to ride your bike.
True. Yeah. Yeah.
So if you're a home mechanic, it's in that sense. Yeah. So I think, firstly, put down the multi-tool. You shouldn't be fixing your bike with a multi-tool. But then, get yourself some nice quality hex keys. And I think for most people, that'll make the biggest difference and best bang for buck as far as workshop upgrades.
Even I was thinking the other day, I got the Vera Allen keys. I got a fresh set because my old set were running out with the black finish. And just thinking about how well made the ball end is on those compared to like a cheap set that would round it like 3 mil. Again, adjusting those damn grub screws on brakes that are made of cheese. Yeah. Like a cheap 2 mil would round that out in 3 seconds with their ball head, whereas a Vera just grips in there nicely, and it makes such a big difference.
Makes a huge difference. And that's the thing, is like a lot of bikes have fasteners that aren't necessarily fantastic quality. And so it pays to have really good tools, because the really good tools will overcome, in almost all cases, they'll overcome the cheapness of those fasteners and let you work on that bike without stripping out bolts. So in almost all cases, if you're working on a bike and you strip out like a stem bolt, it's often because of the cheap tool that you used, because a good tool would have prevented that from happening. Even if the bolt itself isn't great.
Any pivot hardware.
Probably the most common one I see is like anytime like a T25 bolt is in existence on a bike, like a rotor bolt or anything. There are so many bad T25 tools on the market. Pretty much all of them are bad, except for like 3 brands from Europe. So, like T25, if you've ever like stripped out a rotor bolt, it's not necessarily your fault. It's just the tool you're using. And get yourself like a Wera or a Weha or a PB Swiss, and then you'll be like, okay, torques. I don't hate it as much.
Yeah.
So
it's 100%. What's the tool you have that you think no one else needs but you just love? Like the one thing.
There's a few. Off the top of my head, I've got, the little battery covers for coin cell battery devices. Like you might have like an old bike computer or or like new axis battery compartment, like for a shifter, where you use a coin to open it.
Yeah.
Or you use a big flathead screwdriver.
Mm.
I have a screwdriver with like a coin shaped driver on it.
Yep.
And like a coin, like the perfect coin for one of those hatches is probably like a 20-cent piece, maybe $1. So like if you got one of those dollars and you found like another 29 of them, you've got yourself roughly 30 tools.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Whereas I just traded all those 30 tools for one screwdriver.
That's insane.
That's a good one. I've also got a little tool that is just like a little needle driver that opens up the end of cable housings. So it's double-sided. It's got one side for like old brake housing, which is still a thing on road bikes or rebake bikes. And then the other side's for gear housing, and it's basically just like this cylindrical item with a pin down in the middle of it. So you slide the housing into it, and then the pin like self guides itself into the housing and opens it up. And I can hear now people turning off, being like, "This is ridiculous. Just use a sharpened spoke or use an awl." But it's actually, the cool thing is you can slide the housing into it, and then you can spin the tool. And if the tool spins, then you know it's like free of resistance and free of friction and is actually opened up correctly. And if the tool doesn't spin, then you know you're going to have a lot of friction when you put a cable through it. So again, it's one of those things that like saves like a couple of seconds with each time you cut a piece of housing. But if you're cabling up an entire bike, that's adds up pretty quickly. So.
And again, like if your rear derailleur isn't shifting properly, there's a high chance that you got extra friction in that cable. Like
exactly. So so that's a cool little tool. I think it's a company called Elvedez. I think I had to import it from Europe. I haven't seen it in Australia. But it's like I think it's called like the cable pricker or something like that. Yeah, right. Something very Euro.
Yeah.
But that's a pretty pointless tool as well.
Actually, right. I got like an old Jaguar cable cutter.
Yeah.
And they have the pricker on the end of the handle, which has the guided spacer in it. So this is, and that's the game changer in itself. Yeah. And I will never use any other cable cutter because it just.
So this thing's like same idea, but it's like the size of your palm, basically. So it's just like a really like bulky version of it.
Yeah.
So it's anyway. Yeah, there's but I guess if anyone were to like open up one of the drawers in my workshop, they would probably find things that are more useless than what I've just described.
Have you counted your tools recently? Like, is there a number you know of that roughly you'd have? Or you just keep that out of your mind?
I keep it out of my mind. I've once come close to calculating it, but also purposely left stuff out because it horrified me, the number. It's like we're talking, I don't know, almost 20 years of tool collecting at this point.
True.
So it's a lot. To give you an idea of like how obsessed I've been on this beat, or how bad I've been on this beat, I think for my 16th birthday, I asked for and got a Chris King hub tool set.
Yep, that's
for like the old ISO hubs. And I then didn't use it for like 3 or 4 years. And after that, like I didn't have a use for it.
You just wanted it.
I just wanted it. And that was probably like the first like real nice tool that I ever got. Cause that stuff's like Abbey Bike Tools quality before Abbey Bike Tools existed. It was all like, beautifully anodized and really nicely machined and really intricate. But it had a single task of servicing Chris King hubs. So
just bike things again.
So that's like stuff like that has, that was when I was 16 and it's many years later now. So it's, things have gotten out of hand.
I wouldn't say so. I think I rate it. I think it's good. It's good for like mechanics as well to have somewhere to turn and look at good tools and find different options for things as well. Like I've never really seen that around as much either.
No. And like the bike industry is pretty big when you think about it. Like when you think about how many bike shops are in Australia, like there's, I don't know what the exact count is these days, but it's well north of 600 bike shops. And you assume each one has one mechanic. Some have 5, 6 even. That's quite a few people. And then Australia is a very small country.
Yeah.
So you figure out how many bike mechanics are all over the world, and it's not a small number. So for me, like Cool Tool Tuesday is written basically for professional mechanics. But through that, what happens is you get all these consumers that probably have no interest in doing the repair themselves, who are finding out about a world of tools and a world of mechanics that they had never heard about, would never see. And it's, I'm told it's quite interesting. So I think they're just nerds, but so I think in that sense, it kind of reached this quite broad audience in that you've got professional mechanics reading it because they want to buy stuff, or they want to get the better tool, and you got home mechanics reading it because they're just interested in what the pros use.
I think it legitimizes the profession a little bit as well, because it's no longer you can fix a bike with a multi-tool, as you said. Like, was the other day, like, you know, if the other day I was fixing a V-brake while updating the software on a e-bike and working out the wiring loom deficiencies in something else, like it's no longer just fix it with a screwdriver and Allen wrench. Like it's such a different ball game.
Yeah. So I hope so. Like I think sometimes showing the cost of some of the tooling does hopefully put it in perspective of people, and where they're like, oh, I'm thinking about installing my own disc brakes on a new frame. And it's like, well, is that frame faced?
Yep.
That's a barrier. And whether it's a good or bad thing, the bike industry does pump out product that needs to be fixed before it can be used.
Yeah, don't get me started. But
I mean, it's not every bike, but like a lot of new bikes arrive with a bent derailleur hanger, and that's a small thing. The big issue is when they've oversprayed the brake mount and your brake can't sit straight without removing material from the frame. And that's through COVID that has only become more common because
just pumping out bikes.
Yep. There's the demand there to make things quicker.
And headsets, and like, you know, you got $10,000 bikes with paint inside the headset cups.
Yeah.
On their integrated headset. And it's insane, some of the quality control that's happening at the moment. But
and it might work fine, but it also might continuously lead to loose headsets
or creak and be annoying.
So it's it's one of those things that a really good shop will know how to fix that, and a home consumer will blame the product.
Yeah. What are there any mechanics that you kind of follow on Insta or anything like that?
It's like Instagram's just awesome for that. Like it's a really cool community. And I think Toolbox Wars has done a really good job as far as promoting that community and giving that community a voice and giving them reach. But like BK comes to mind. Brad Kelly works out of Drift in Newcastle. Probably one of the most underrated riders in the country.
Oh, dude, go look on Roots and Rain, and you're just like, what the fuck? He's the fastest rider no one's ever heard of, unless you're in Newcastle, in which case you know who he is, or in Sydney. I mean, he's just an awesome mechanic. He's wrenched for Jill Kittner and done. He's oversees a workshop of a very big workshop. He shares stuff on his account that's just awesome, like old school tricks that are kind of lost through the years of shops that most people no longer remember or never learnt. He shares them, and I think that's really cool. So I'd put him at the top of the list as far as mechanics to follow. Personally, like me, I'm probably more in behind the scenes conversations with people. I'm learning from people with
like cool little projects they're doing, like making little custom tools with 3D printers or machining custom tools and figuring out why they're doing that and what led to it. And but again, it's through Instagram. It's cool to see. So and there's heaps of mechanics. Like really anyone following the World Cup scene is any of those guys. You've got Aaron Gwynn's mechanic. Mr. Hall on Juan. Instagram. Yeah. Juan. Brad Copeland, who's Kate Courtney's mechanic in the cross country scene. He's pretty entertaining.
Low-key genius. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So quirky as well. It's so good to watch him do just weird shit.
Yeah. So there's just a lot of people with good vibes. But yeah, as far as people actually sharing tips and tricks, it's I'd put Kelly at the top of that list.
Angry Bike Mechanic is always good to follow.
Yes. Yeah, that is. Yeah, he's the workshop manager of a big shop in Sweden, I believe. And we're always sharing hilarious things between us, but he is worth a share. His page is pretty much consistently a what not to do page.
Yeah. That's what's so good.
He does occasionally offer some tricks, but most of his tips are related to like pro level pranks.
Yeah, that was a good one recently.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So the one he posted most recently was he'd initially done one where you install a star nut in your fork and then you drop a ball bearing in and then you install another star nut. So like you'd never see the second star nut no matter which direction you look up the fork because it just looked like the star nut's in there. But you'd have a mystery rattle in your bike forever. And he figured out that you combine the ball bearing now with a magnet. Because then that way, when you're just gently shaking the bike, the ball bearing is stuck to the magnet, doesn't make any noise. So, but it's once you hit a bump, the ball bearing dislodges and starts rattling. So it's
the best thing about that prank is you took the time to refine the size of the magnet to make it rattle in precisely the worst times. Yes.
So it's So I'm sure some people will misuse that information, but
go for
it's all good fun.
It's good. Yeah. And he doesn't hold back when shit isn't made right as well. Yeah.
So he's definitely good value. I'd definitely follow him. So Instagram's a cool community for that stuff.
For sure. Cool. Might start wrapping things up a little bit.
Yeah.
What advice would you have for people looking to get into either journalism or working as a bike mechanic? How to get to like that high end level of bike mechanics?
Bike mechanics, I'd say find a shop that has good mechanics in it and be modest and just be a sponge around them and don't come in with an attitude and don't come in with any preset notions and just listen and learn. And you might not agree with everything they have to say or the way they do everything, but you'll pick up a lot. And I'd say if you can find a shop that's willing to let you come in and work with them, it might not be for the money you want. But that's going to be the best education you can get. There's no university, there's no school that can teach you that stuff. You'll learn really quickly and it'll be literally months and you'll be a much better mechanic for it. And I'd also say just pay attention to manuals is the other thing for mechanics. Read what you can. SRAM, Shimano, Fox, they all have their own ways of doing things and their own recommended approaches, and they're all pretty detailed at how to service their products. And you'll learn a lot by reading through that stuff. Again, sometimes you'll find your own way of doing things, but knowing what's officially recommended will get you 99% of the way there.
Like the best tip for mechanical front derailleurs from Shimano was in their manual. And most people don't know it because they've never read that manual. I'm not going to say it because I want you to go read their manual.
I'm curious what you think the best tip is, but
just the limit.
Tell me
the limit screw, how they put the limit screw up to the big chainring, and then you put the cable in, and you undo the limit screw again, and cable tension's
tension
perfect.
on the cable tension. Yeah.
It's perfect every time, but no one does it. Everyone fucks around because they never read the manual.
On a related note, I recommend, if you're adjusting limit screws on front derailleurs, I recommend getting a screwdriver with a logo on it. So that way you know when you do a full turn with this, based on the screwdriver doing a full turn of when the logo comes back around.
Yeah.
You can then know that when you've played with the cable tension, you can then put the limit screw back exactly where you had it before, based on the orientation of the screwdriver logo.
That makes sense.
Fun tip.
I've always just marked my screwdrivers with a little notch in them. But
that works too.
Yeah, I'm cheap.
I guess you don't have to spend $20 on a screwdriver to get that. You could just use a Sharpie if you have to. Journalism. Don't. No. Journalism is a tough one. It's forever changing. It feels like it's forever shrinking. Not convinced it's the best path of the bike industry to try get into. I think there's a lot other paths that might be as exciting, that would be more lucrative long term and less fragile as far as job security goes. But that said, again, I would just try figure out people that doing stuff that you like, publishing stuff or creating stuff that you like, and try work out how you can probably help them. And the sad reality with cycling journalism is when you're starting off, you're probably not going to get paid.
Do you get paid?
Oh, wait.
No, it's not as lucrative as people make it out to be. That's for sure.
Yeah, I actually get given a Mercedes-Benz each year it's split between the top bike brands.
Yeah.
And then I resell that. That's how I pay myself. I shouldn't say that because people are going to believe it.
I would actually be completely fine if that was the deal.
That would be pretty good, wouldn't it? So the reality is, a lot of the magazines and stuff already have staff, and if they're going to pay someone, they're going to pay someone to make their lives easier. So it can be hard to get started in the space because they don't want to give out their freelance budget to someone they're going to have to babysit or to hold their hand through as they're figuring it out. At least these days. So I think the thing is to find out people working for the publications you want to work with, or find out the people doing cool content and see how you can help and pitch ideas to them. If you've got some ideas where you think the publication can be better, pitch the idea and suggest how you can go about doing it. And they might just say yes. And once you've got your foot in the door, things are pretty easy from there, I believe. I think, once you can get published out there and show that you can be trusted to hit a deadline or produce good content, then I think it's much easier to get others to follow.
I think, deadlines and how fast you have to produce content for some things is not known outside the industry. And and that's when it's 11:30 at night, you're punching out an article just before a flight. You start to wonder whether it's worth it, but then
and that's the other thing. Like this, the media side is awesome and has amazing perks, but the reality of it is it is still a job, and all jobs have elements that are work, and the media side, what you don't see, like you see, these great written reviews or videos published, but what you don't see is the week of a slog of trying to create this in time, and often starting a draft and throwing it away and starting again or whatever it is. There's a lot of time that goes into those reviews or those launches or whatever it is, and it doesn't always look like the amount of time.
No,
the end result doesn't always portray how much time's gone into it, and that's kind of why I joked when if you're looking to get into media, don't. The hourly pay is not good.
Not when you break it down.
Not when you break it down. Like it's, I've been doing this for nearly a decade, and the pay's okay now, but I mean, arguably I don't have anywhere to go from here. So
Yeah.
it's the reality is a lot of the people doing it are doing it for the passion and doing it for the ability to get to ride stuff without actually having to pay for it themselves. They get to borrow a bike for 2 weeks and figure it out and further their own riding or further their own experience through that. And it's not necessarily the paycheck that comes from the work.
Yeah, exactly. The happiness is right up there sometimes.
Yeah.
Is there anything you would have done differently or changed up till now?
It's hard to say. Probably not. I'm pretty happy with where I am. I think I had goals and ambitions to really go down the brand management side of things and really steer a product side of things. And I kind of still question whether that would be as good, but I think having been where I am now, where I get to experience all the products and not just have to continuously play with one brand, I think I'm pretty fortunate in that regard. And I think I'd miss the ability to, once I get bored of something, to put it down and pick up something completely else and just
100%. Yeah.
jump around as my mind does. So I think I'm pretty happy with where I am at the moment and pretty fortunate to have gotten here. But at the same time, I'm well aware that it's tough to get to where I am. Like we recently hired a tech editor. It wasn't that recent. It was over a year ago. Had 220 resumes. So
yeah, right. Yeah.
There's a lot of people out there that want to pursue this career. And often it's hard to know what can make you stand apart.
Very, very hard. And last question, always kind of hardest, but what, if you're feeling a bit demotivated to do a review on something that's really not worth reviewing or something, like, is there anything you do to kind of get motivated, like any music or anything that gets you pumped up to get the work done?
Honestly, a bike ride is number one for me. And I don't tell myself that enough because I'll often just like sit frustrated at my keyboard writing rubbish about rubbish. But yeah, bike ride, even if you go for a ride on that product, that'll basically write the review itself. I'll come back and I'll be able to write 1,000 words in an hour after that. It's I think ride your bike is probably the main thing, but also everyone's different. So for me, I'm like, for music just distracts me. I end up not focusing. I just end up going into the clouds and I don't do anything when I listen to music. So no, music's not the answer for me, but just riding the thing.
Do you ever take like a notepad or anything out on a ride and jot down ideas?
Unfortunately, always. So that's probably the other thing with like being a tech editor is makes you pretty bad to ride with. And more to the point, I actually no longer ride with people. And when I'm on a first ride with any product, I try not to ride with anyone because I find that being with someone is too distracting from the task at hand. And honestly, like first impressions are everything when it comes to a lot of bike equipment, because that first impression is when it literally is fresh in your mind and when it's different and you perceive things so much more obviously than the second or third ride, you're already getting used to it. So, so often it's like, I once went for some chocolate tasting and they give you like apple between each different chocolate to reset your palate. You kind of have to jump off the bike you're testing to get onto something else to reset your perception and then jump back onto the product you're testing just to get that first impression again. So for me, the first ride is crucial, and I just use notes on my phone. But I'm often like, my first ride is super lame. I'll go to like a local trail or like a local road, and I'll just start doing random things around the block or whatever it is. And often it's like you're setting in the bike, you're setting it up, but I'm taking notes with like every like few hundred meters. I'm stopping and being like, yep. And then like going, finding another corner and then putting question marks related to things I thought I felt that I then need to retest later or figure out again later. So yeah, it comes back to first ride. I'm often by myself, and it's kind of a lonely riding cycle. I'm often turning down rides with other people because I've got stuff to test, and I'm not fit enough to ride 3 times in a day.
It's crazy how much comes from that first ride and stays into the end of the review. Yep. I've always been blown away with that.
Yeah. So yeah, I've kind of said before, and I think this has been written in a few places, but it's like for me, like with a road bike, first 30K you're testing the bike, and then after that you're testing yourself.
Yeah.
So it's like
pretty much.
First impressions, everything, and it's pretty critical when it comes to testing product. Your mind will get used to things very, very quickly.
And you adapt to the
bike.
Adapt.
Yeah, you absolutely adapt. So yeah, I think that's the funny thing is all bikes will get you from A to B, right? Like you could, in theory, like it's, we obsess about the smallest of details, and the conversation of like high pivot versus 4-bar and all this other stuff.
Yeah.
The reality is that you're going to adapt to whatever you are riding, and that will then be probably the fastest product for you at that time. So it's first impressions.
Do you have a loop that you do for every bike?
Not that I do for every bike. I've got consistent roads that I try to reuse a lot. Road riding's a lot easier because there's only like 3 different directions I can go in Sydney.
The road riding sucks up there.
So road riding, like unintentionally, I end up riding the same roads with the same, but like with every bike, and I'll have patches of road that I know to do certain things with the bike to get an understanding of how they each compare. Off-road stuff is for me much more fun because I can go more places. And again, I have local stuff that I know, but yeah, off-road being dynamic, I tend not to bother with trying to find the exact same patch and test them on. The difference is if I'm like wheels, I'll test, back to back to get an idea of stuff. But yeah, for bikes, it's just harder. There's too many variables with the whole bike. So I'll just ride the thing and figure it out.
Pretty much. It's not an exact science, is it? It's
not at all an exact science. And the ones that try to make it an exact science are the ones that have made our bikes dull. So there's some like some German magazines have over the years done some pretty cool testing as far as like stiffness to weight ratio of frames, and the result is brands start to design around those tests, which doesn't make for a better bike.
Nope. No. And again, it's hard as well because there's no such thing as a shit bike anymore. It's just what works for each different rider.
Yeah, you say that, but I was just in Colorado doing a cycling tips field test, and there were a couple of shit bikes on that test. But
they might not have been. They might have been shit for the purpose that you were using it for, but to someone else, they're gonna.
Plus, if you're someone that needs a road, like a gravel bike that doesn't have traction or brakes, then I think then that could be for you.
Track cyclists. It's made for them.
Yeah. A gravel bike for velodrome use.
I can't wait to see that review. I heard about it in the Nerd Alert thing, in the potty you do. And I can't wait to see what bike that was.
Yeah, that's like we're talking about, being fair to brands, so they come back and you give them another chance. That brand's not coming back.
Yeah, right.
I don't think they're going to speak to us after that review, but we'll see.
I'm so keen to read it. I might even go past the paywall so I can get more than 3 articles a day or something.
Yeah.
Controversial.
Oh, maybe.
Probably not.
It's worth it.
Easy real bias. Because it's paying your bills. All right. Thanks so much for coming on, man. It's been
Thanks for having me.
Really good chat and a pleasure to have you on. So, yeah. And thanks for listening to all my dumb Instagram questions and chatting over time. It's been fun.
Yeah. Well, keep doing the podcast. I'm enjoying it.
Sick. I enjoy yours. So,
thank you.
All right. Keeps me a bit grounded in road.
Good.
Easy, mate. We'll speak soon, and I'll let you know when this goes up.
Absolutely.
Easy, mate. Take it easy.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to that one, guys. It was an absolute blast to be chatting with Dave. I hope you learn a bunch of stuff around tools, a bunch of stuff about working on your bike, becoming a journalist, and man, he had some really, really cool things to say in there. As per usual, thanks to our sponsors and supporters, Trek, NS Dynamics, Tailored Trails, Lead Out Sports, Franked, Dirt Surfer, Crush, and Fist. Make sure you hit up those brands, buy some stuff. Use Beyond the Tape 10 or Beyond the Tape 15. It's one of them at all of their checkouts. See what happens. If not, hit me up on Instagram because I've probably forgotten them. Should condense that one day. If you don't want to buy some stuff from our supporters and help those who support us, make sure you tell your mum, tell your dog, tell your deer, tell your auntie, your chookin, whoever. Make sure you share this podcast around with your mates. Like it, review it on iTunes or wherever you listen to it. Follow the Instagram page, share it around on Instagram, do all that thing. Trying to grow the audience a bit this year. So any help from you guys would be greatly appreciated. But anyway, thanks for listening. And until the next episode, have a bunch of fun.